Morality, a sense of what's right and what's wrong that differs from person to person and culture to culture without any rhyme or reason. It's something deeply subjective. It can never be measured quantifiably or understood mathematically. Or can it? Well, to answer that question, we need to go to ancient Greece.
You do realize you didn't actually have to go to Greece, right?
Anyway, morality is something that people have been pondering over for thousands of years, but most likely we've had some kind of a sense of it for millions. We even see this in other species like elephants and chimps, who will not only engage in altruistic behavior that doesn't benefit them, but will punish those who act out of line. So that's it, right? Certain species that are complex enough will develop certain moral codes that help the group as a whole stay alive. We inherited that, and that's just kind of where we get our sense of morality from today. Well, no. I mean, why is it that just 70 years ago, Alan Turing, the guy who basically invented computer science, was convicted and chemically castrated by the British government simply for being gay? Now, today, the vast majority of Brits see homosexuality as completely fine. Why is it that there are entire subreddits dedicated to figuring out who is right and who is wrong in certain situations? Why is it that when you ask moral questions to people on the street, you can get such vastly different answers? Well, to explain this, many people throughout history have tried to come up with some kind of code of morality to finally explain what's right and what's wrong. Now, I'm going to tell you about 5 of them, which, once you understand them, you'll be more well-equipped to answer moral questions than anyone you know. Number 5 is this guy, Plato. Plato was born in the 5th century BC here in Athens, and he believed in something called eudaimonism, which is based on the overall goal of achieving happiness. Now, he never clearly defined what he meant by happiness, but it's believed that he was referring more to a long-term well-being over short-term pleasure, or what many people will call the well-lived life. Something that separates Plato's eudaimonism from more modern ways of thinking is he believed it was never okay to do bad, even if something good might come of it as a result. In other words, he believed in something called moral absolutism, the idea that certain actions are either always wrong or always the right thing to do. He believed that morality is objective, and that virtue comes from knowledge, and vice from ignorance. In the words of his teacher, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's at this point where I want to introduce a kind of ethics compass, where on the y-axis we have absolutism and relativism, which is about whether certain actions are either absolute, so they're wrong in every context, or relative, so they are dependent on the context or their consequences. Then on the y-axis we have objectivism and subjectivism, which obviously is about whether morality is objective or subjective. So I'll put Plato around here, and by the end of this video you'll have a pretty good idea of where all the major philosophers land on this compass. You'll know where you'll land on this compass, and where people you know land, even if they don't even know it themselves. Moving out of Greece for a minute, we enter a period where Western philosophy is dominated by various Christian thinkers, such as number 6, St. Augustine, who tried to blend philosophy with Christian teachings. He believed in something called divine command theory. Basically, if God says something is good, it's good. If God says something is bad, it's bad, no matter the context. Now, many atheists might be tempted to think this applies to all religious people, but in my opinion, people tend to get their sense of morality from a mix of what's been normalized to them or growing up, and their personality, like how agreeable or empathetic or neurotic they happen to be. And then they justify that with whatever religious text they happen to believe in, like how some people use the Bible to justify slavery, with verses like Ephesians 6:5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. While other people use the exact same Bible to explain why they oppose slavery, with verses like Exodus 21:16. Whoever kidnaps another man must be put to death, whether he sells him or the man is found in his possession. A popular criticism of divine command theory comes from Plato himself in something called the Euthyphro dilemma. For those who don't know, Plato used to write these fan fiction things he called dialogues, where two characters, usually real people, would have a conversation, which Plato used to make his points. Kinda like when people on the internet make up fake situations to get mad about. Anyway, in one of them, Socrates asked someone named Euthyphro, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious? Or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? In other words, is something morally good because God commands it? Or does God command something because it's already good? According to Plato, if something is good just because God commands it, then morality is arbitrary. God could tell you to go kill someone to cure his boredom, and that would be completely morally right. However, if God commands something because it's already good, then God has no place in morality. Maybe he can know what is good, but they're not good because of God. Another problem that arises if someone gets their sense of ethics from a god is if someone disagrees with what that god says, or believes in a completely different god entirely, then there's not really any way to have a productive conversation on ethics and come to an agreement. This is displayed well in this debate between a streamer named Destiny and someone named Tristan.
Let's say somebody comes up to you and they say murder is good, and then you say murder is bad. And then he says, well, how do you know murder is bad? And you go, because God told me. And then you ask him, why do you think murder is good? And he says, because God told me. How do you resolve that disagreement?
Dude, this is the stupidest hypothetical. That's not an argument at all. Dude, can you do that again? That was really
Sure.
fun.
I'll repeat the question to you. Two people try to resolve a moral quandary. Two people have a moral question, and they come to the answer. And they have two different answers for it. But they both say that they've received revelation through God. How do you resolve that disagreement and figure out who's right and who's wrong?
People who believe in divine command theory have a tough time answering this question. And the truth is, there's only really one honest answer. My religion is right, and your religion is wrong. I think we can all agree that St. Augustine would go up here, which brings us to number 5. David Hume. Those of you who watched my last video will know Hume as the guy who said, reason is slave to the passions. In other words, reason and knowledge can help us understand the world, but it's ultimately feelings or passion that give us purpose, a reason to do anything, and therefore without it, knowledge and reason are pointless. To Hume, if we call something immoral, that's simply us expressing disapproval. It's not a fact that's been discovered. He believed that ethics comes from sympathy, and while it might vary a bit from person to person, we generally view the same things as virtuous, like generosity, kindness, gratitude. So it is technically subjective, but generally follows trends. His way of thinking is called sentimentalism, and it lands around here on our Oh, sorry, there's a knock on the door. Hello?
Hey dude, I was just wondering where your wife is so I could kill her.
Oh god, what do I do? I know my beautiful wife is in the kitchen, and I should lie to save her life, but it's unethical to lie, right? Screw it. She's not here right now.
Oh, okay.
Hold on, what the flip just happened? Let's rewind. You see, my wife actually overheard the hitman and decided to escape through the back door, only to run into him on her way out. If I had just told the truth and let him in, then she would have had a chance to escape. Which raises the question, am I responsible for my wife's death? Well, according to 18th century Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant, The answer is yes. You see, he believed in something called the categorical imperative, rules that everyone is obligated to follow whether they want to or not.
But how do we know what these rules are, you might ask?
Well, Kant believed that we should discover moral rules not through passion or any kind of god, but through reason. His most significant method of doing this was called the universalizability principle. He said we should only act in ways that we would want to be a universal law. That is, a moral law that people should always follow without contradiction. So, in the hitman scenario, if I were to lie, I would be treating lying as a universal law. According to Kant, while it might seem like the right thing to do at the time, by doing this, I'm willing lying into a universal law. In a world where this is the case, everyone lies all the time, so no one believes anyone ever, which makes lying pointless. This is that contradiction part he was talking about. And it's the same with theft. In certain situations, it might seem like the right thing to do, but for example, if you steal a banana from me because you're hungry, if it's universal law, someone might steal it from you, and then they'd have it stolen from them, and someone would steal it from them, again and again, until no one can have the banana, in which case theft is pointless, because no one can have it. According to Kant, these are examples of self-contradictory principles.
Now, that's all well and good, you might say, but what if I care more about saving my loved ones' lives than following these rules you've given me, Kant?
And that's a good point. Very often, the interests of people are in contradiction to strict adherence to certain moral rules. Plus, who's to say that the hitman scenario would even play out like that? I mean, what if my wife was deaf? Then if I told him the truth, he'd come in and gun her down right there. This universalizability principle seems pretty far-fetched too. I mean, people lie, cheat and steal all the time, and it's still pretty useful. I mean, if you're hungry, you can just go to your local Woolies and steal a baguette, and no one's gonna steal it back from you just because you did. Okay, sounds like we need a new system of ethics altogether. One that focuses more on consequences than strict adherence to certain arbitrary rules. Well, that's the idea behind consequentialism, a school of thought invented by 18th century British philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Or at least that's what I was gonna say. Until I realized some Chinese guy came up with this idea over 2,000 years prior. Mozi was born in 470 BC in China, and he thought it was silly to focus on strict rules like don't steal, don't lie, when the consequences of these actions can vary so much based on the context. In fact, I would say there are times when it's not just okay to, but you're obligated to break these rules. I mean, what if there's someone going around in a park throwing rocks at people? Surely it would be acceptable to steal the rock from them. Or what if there's someone who you know has an explosive temper, and they ask what you think of their lame Hawaiian t-shirt? It would be a lot easier for everyone if we just keep them happy. Another criticism I have of Kant is that he falls victim to something called categorical thinking. This is most easily understood with color. While we use words like red, green, and blue to describe colors, the truth is they lay on a series of spectrums. We just put them into categories so they're easier to communicate. And while this is useful, so you don't have to describe a hex value every time you want to talk about a color, it's important to remember that these categories aren't objective. What we may call green, someone speaking Japanese would call a different shade of blue. Or what we would call light blue, someone speaking Russian would call a totally different color to dark blue. And the same is true about actions. For example, someone speaking English might identify with deontology, which is a moral absolutist school of thought focused on ethical rules and obligations rather than the consequences of specific actions, and say certain actions are always wrong no matter the context or consequences. Like murder, for example. Then someone might reply, sure, murder is generally wrong, but what about if a foreign army is marching over the hill? Would it be wrong to fire at them to defend yourself and your community? Then they might say, well, no, you see, that's technically not murder. Murder is the premeditated, unlawful, intentional ending of a human life. And of course, it's not illegal to fire upon an invading army. But what if we didn't have that word murder in English? Then they would have to say, okay, killing is generally wrong, but it can be justified in certain contexts, like a foreign army marching over the hill. All of a sudden, they're not sounding like much of a moral absolutist, are they? Or what if a train is headed towards 4 people tied down to a track, and the only way to save them is to divert it to only hit 1 person? Actually, that's pretty complicated. In fact, it's probably the most controversial hypothetical in all of ethics. It's called the trolley problem. And if you wouldn't flick the lever, you're probably a deontologist, like Kant. But if you would, you're probably a utilitarian, like Mozi or Jeremy Bentham. Utilitarianism posits that doing harm can be acceptable if it's necessary for the greater good. Now, this seems to be the framework that most people use nowadays. Most people would say it's okay to violently arrest someone if they're a threat to society, or poison an invasive species if they're a threat to the environment, yada yada. But a pretty popular criticism of utilitarianism is that it can be used to justify some pretty horrible things in the name of the greater good. I mean, people can justify any number of terrible things if they think it's necessary for some kind of greater purpose. But here's where I disagree with that criticism. This is what I call the utilitarian scale. Whenever you have a dilemma of whether to act or not, you can measure the options on this scale. So in the trolley problem, on one side you have 4 people's lives, and on the other side you have 1 person's life. A pretty easy decision for a utilitarian. But what if you have, say, 1 million people's lives, and a hypothetical imagined utopia on the other? How would you feel about this decision? Well, there is some people who would say, sorry to those 1 million people, but you need to die for this utopia. Now some might see this and think, look how awful utilitarianism is. They use it to justify killing 1 million people. Well, not so fast. In my opinion, where the disagreement often lies isn't in utilitarianism itself, but how much they value the 2 things on each side of the scale. Or in this scenario, how likely that utopia even is to come into fruition, or how necessary it is to end those 1 million people's lives for that utopia. All completely valid concerns, by the way, but what they do is disregard utilitarianism altogether, when instead, oftentimes, the disagreement lies just in a different assessment of that specific situation. But hey, what about those 2 things I just mentioned? How likely it is for the utopia to even happen? Or how necessary it is for those 1 million people's lives to be lost? What if you don't know what the outcome of a certain action is going to be? That was the question ethics professor Roger Crisp was trying to answer when he came up with a thought experiment called the rash doctor. He said to imagine a doctor with a patient who's in dire straits. Now, the doctor has 2 options. He can give him pill A, which has a 99% chance of instantly giving him an agonizing death, but a 1% chance of restoring him to perfect health. Or he can give him pill B, which only has a 1% chance of killing him and a 99% chance of saving him, but he won't be at quite 100% health. Let's say he loses a toe or something. Still a pretty easy decision, right? Well, the doctor decides to risk it and give him pill A. Then, miraculously, the 1% chance happens and he's saved. Now the question is, did the doctor do the right thing? Well, someone operating under strict consequentialism would have to say yes. Sure, it seemed crazy at the time, but it ultimately had a positive impact. Or what if 2 people shoot a gun in the air in a crowded area? Person A's bullet lands safely on the ground, while person B's hits someone on the head. Again, a strict consequentialist would have to say, person A's actions were less unethical than person B's, despite them doing the exact same thing with the exact same intent. Well, there's someone who would disagree strongly with this. Someone by the name of John Stuart Mill. Mill was born in 1806 to an esteemed philosopher family. He was raised with the intent of creating a genius who would carry on the cause of utilitarianism after Jeremy Bentham's death. And that he did masterfully.
While he was a utilitarian and a consequentialist, he saw Jeremy Bentham's work as incomplete. In the thought experiment where the two people fire in the air, Mill would say that even though person A didn't directly cause harm to someone like person B did, that was pure luck. He still did something that put human life in danger, and thus is just as immoral as person B. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's ways of thinking came to be known as act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism, respectively, with Bentham focusing purely on the consequences of individual actions, and Mill emphasizing rules of thumb that will generally lead to more well-being for society, almost like a blend of relativism and absolutism. He also saw morality as objective, so we'll put him down here somewhere. I pretty much agree with him, so I'll put myself here too. Let me know where you are on this compass. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.
They always said that Charlie Kirk was a Nazi, then they celebrated after they killed him. They tried to tell us that Black Lives Matter and that white people have always been villains.
Hold on a second. There's someone I forgot to mention. Someone so controversial, so divisive, so rage-inducing that the mere mention of his name is enough to send some into shock. I'm talking, of course, about Peter Singer. He was born not too far from here in Melbourne, Australia in 1946. He's still alive and teaching ethics at Princeton University. But in 1972, he released a paper that suggested the way you, your friends, family, loved ones, and everyone you know thinks about morality is completely and deeply wrong, even evil. And the worst part is, he's kinda right. Let me explain. Let's say you're walking down the street one day, everything's going well, until you look over and see that someone in a wheelchair has fallen over and is drowning in a muddy puddle. What do? Well, the obvious answer is to walk over and help him up. A pretty easy decision. But what if I said in this scenario you're wearing a really nice expensive pair of Jordans that are tied on so tight that you won't have time to take them off? So by stepping in the mud, you'd ruin them. Does that change anything for you? Well, I hope not. But Peter Singer would say, hold on, if you'd be willing to sacrifice money to save someone right in front of you from dying, then what about all the people around the world suffering from famine and treatable diseases that could be saved with a simple donation? There are reliable charities like Oxfam and UNICEF set up right now to transfer money from people in rich countries to those suffering from famine and diseases in the global south. That's one of the core ideas behind what Peter Singer calls effective altruism. And I'm going to tell you about a few more of them. Let's dive in. In the future, I'm going to make a whole video about whether money can buy happiness. But for now, let's just assume that people want money, first of all, to meet their immediate needs for survival, like food, water, shelter, and then they want money for things that bring them pleasure, like treats, entertainment, yada yada. But here's where it gets complicated, because not every dollar is worth the same. Let's say you're homeless, with no food, no water, not even enough money for cardboard and a marker. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Beast comes up to you and gives you $1,000, and you're over the moon. You won't have to worry about food for a few days, you can buy a tent, toiletries, new clothes, you're set. Then, just when you think things couldn't get any better, he pulls out another $1,000, and you're so excited. Not quite as much as before because you have all your needs met, but still, it's great, and you're very appreciative. But then another 1,000, and another. And another. Soon enough, when 153,000 turns into 154,000, you'll sat there bored, wondering when he's going to leave you alone. And this is because of something I like to call the diminishing return of a dollar. Every dollar you gain contributes to your well-being and happiness, but slightly less than the last one, until eventually it completely plateaus. Let's say, after decades of working hard and saving, you have $50,000 to buy your dream car. Now, the first day you have it, you're jumping up in joy, punching the air, and screaming in happiness. By week 2, you've mellowed out a bit, but are still feeling good. By week 4, your excitement fades, and this is just your car. It's a thing to get from point A to point B. Decades of hard work and $50,000 just for a few weeks of happiness. And that's because of something called hedonic adaptation. Your brain can only handle a certain level of excitement for so long until you return to baseline happiness. No matter how many cool gadgets you buy, good foods you eat, or drugs you take. We've only had science to back this up for a few decades, but people like the Buddha and Stoic philosophers from Greece were talking about this thousands of years ago. But what does this mean for altruism? Well, how about instead of spending $50,000 on a new car, we put it towards a good cause, like training a guide dog for a blind person. But hold on, Peter Singer would say, you're forgetting a crucial part, the effective part in effective altruism. Training a guide dog costs about $50,000, the same as the car. We should be trying to figure out how to do the most good for the least amount of money. So thinkers like him tried to do just that, and they did, in the form of mosquito nets. You see, the animal that causes and has caused the most human deaths in history isn't lions, snakes, or even humans, but mosquitoes. And that's because of infectious diseases like malaria, which kill over 600,000 people a year, with children under 5 making up a vast majority of those deaths. But by simply installing mosquito nets onto beds in sub-Saharan Africa, we can prevent millions of unnecessary deaths. Now, we're going to get to the criticisms of effective altruism in a minute, but first of all, I want to talk about obligation and supererogation. Don't worry, I don't flippin' know how to pronounce it either, bro. Back to the drowning wheelchair guy scenario, I think most of us would say we would be obligated to help him up. I mean, of course, we're right there and he needs our help. But what about when you're checking out at the shops and you see that little message pop up? Would you like to round up by $1 to donate to whatever buttfuck charity? It's a nice thing to do, you feel good about yourself, but you're not obligated to do it. It's completely optional, and people don't think of you as a bad person for not doing it. People don't go, oh, you hear about that guy who didn't donate to some buttfuck charity at the shops? Because people don't see it as obligatory, they see it as supererogatory, which means you're going above the minimum expected ethical behavior. But Peter Singer would ask, why do we put the minimum for ethical behavior there? It's something people don't even think about when they call someone a good or a bad person. But we all seem to have two lines that can be crossed. One where you have to be above it to not be a bad person, and one where, by crossing it, you're a very good person. You're doing more than is expected of you. But the truth is, these lines are completely arbitrary. Why is it that helping someone right in front of you is seen as obligatory, but helping someone far away from you is seen as supererogatory? Probably because our brains never developed to think like that. For 99.9% of human history, the thought of being able to impact someone's life thousands of kilometers away was an insane impossibility. But now it is possible, and it's hard for people to wrap their head around. Peter Singer would just tell us to be more consistent with what we see as the bare minimum. Someone far away from you is just as deserving of life as someone right next to you. But what do we do with this information? Well, in the US, the average wedding is $30,000. The average funeral, $8,000. The average wedding ring, $6,000. In their lifetime, the average American will spend $90,000 on alcohol, $200,000 on cigarettes, and lose about $40,000 to gambling. If we could just halve that, how many lives do you think one person could save by donating to mosquito nets in Africa? Well, based on the figure of about $3,000 per life saved, the answer is around 50. 50 once living, breathing individuals who died needlessly of malaria, with most of them dying before age 5. With this information, it might actually make sense to call ordinary people evil. You might be understandably uncomfortable with this conclusion. You might also have some criticisms of effective altruism, like, for one, is it really the responsibility of ordinary people to take care of this problem? I mean, most of this suffering is happening under the nose of governments who are often very corrupt. The leaders of countries like Equatorial Guinea can be seen flaunting luxury lifestyles on social media while their people lay in abject poverty.
Corruption is not bad. Corruption is only bad if I'm not involved.
Yes.
But if I'm part of that corruption, I'll defend it.
That's not to mention the blame we should be placing on Western governments. I mean, France still exercises strong control over its former African colonies, and regularly assassinates any leader who dares defy them. In my country, Australia, I can donate $100 to help feed people in Palestine. Meanwhile, my tax dollars are going towards funding the Israeli military.
many people might understandably think this whole thing is pointless.
But let me put it this way. Let's say in the drowning wheelchair guy scenario, you start walking over to go help him up, when all of a sudden you notice a guy on a big chair sitting right next to the puddle. Turns out they have someone whose job it is to help in this very situation. You sigh with relief and wait, only for him to do absolutely nothing. The question stands, are you still obligated to help? Well, I think most people would still say yes. With that in mind, we can't forget that it really is the governments of the world who should be doing something about this. In my opinion, we should be both engaging in effective altruism and trying to get our governments to act. How do we do that exactly? Well, that's a topic for a future video. Another criticism is that charities are unreliable, they barely make a difference, or even exist just to line the pockets of its administrators. And these are valid concerns. This is why organizations like GiveWell exist. They've screened hundreds of charities and currently only recommend 4, of which Malaria Consortium is number 1. So for those of you who are able, you can donate via the link in the description. Even 1% of your monthly income makes a difference. But that brings up an important point. The income of the people donating. While many countries are definitely richer than others, many people in said countries are broke themselves. And that's why we need to focus not just on donating what we have, but increasing what we have. Now, obviously, this is a lot easier said than done, but there are people who've gone into lucrative fields like investment banking for the purpose of maximizing what they can donate. Granted, there are criticisms of this, like that investment banking doesn't actually contribute to society, or that having to interact with people on Wall Street every day is enough to send someone to an early grave. So something like the medical field might be a better option, in my humble Chungus opinion. But okay, there's still so much to unpack here, like, what about animals? This whole time we've just been talking about the ethics of one of the billions of species. Also, if everyone lived like an effective altruist and minimized their spending, wouldn't that just crash the economy? Come to think of it, if we should be spending as little money as possible, wouldn't it be immoral to reproduce? Well, I'm going to answer all those questions in future videos, but for now, here's one about whether it's ethical to have kids or not. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to chemically castrate that like button, and I'll see you later. Thank you.